Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Okay, let's jump right in. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really trying to get our arms around an incredible range of stories. We're going from the absolutely immense, almost unbelievable scale of the cosmos,
Right.
where it turns out our whole solar system is moving about 3 times faster than anyone expected, all the way down to the microscopic level. I mean, life-saving breakthroughs here on Earth.
Specifically, these nasal nanodrops that are being engineered to basically wipe out aggressive brain tumors.
It really is an amazing contrast, isn't it?
It's a study in dynamic contrasts. I mean, on
Yeah.
one hand, you have this profound revelation about our cosmic motion, something that could rewrite astrophysics textbooks.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have the painstaking, quiet work of researchers developing these precision oncology tools. The fact that we as a civilization are generating knowledge at these two extreme scales at the same time, it's just staggering.
One is forcing us to revise fundamental physics. The other is saving individual lives right now. And that is precisely our mission today. We know you, the learner, are looking for a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. We're going to be your guides through this incredible stack of developments. We'll tackle the high-stakes science, decipher some really complex geopolitical conflicts, and make sure you get the essential insights without the information overload.
We sort of structured this deep dive around a few core areas. First, we really have to confront what's happening with the U.S. domestic policy and how it's bleeding into this international diplomatic minefield around the Ukraine peace proposal.
And at the same time, there are escalating tensions in Asia and these big shifts in global economic power.
Then second, we'll take our essential look at extreme dynamics. That means deep space anomalies, but also some revolutionary green energy science happening right here on Earth.
And finally, we'll look at the future. AI governance, the incredible energy demands that are now driving corporate strategy, and some of the critical global stories, from the Gaza ceasefire strain to some pretty intense political rhetoric in Washington that demand our impartial attention.
It's a lot to cover.
It is. So let's jump in. We're going to start where the stakes are arguably highest right now, diplomatic friction. So the major point of global contention, the thing that's really sucking all the air out of the room diplomatically, is this 28-point U.S. proposal for peace in Ukraine.
Right.
And the mere unveiling of this plan has caused just immediate and very public chaos.
It's a classic example of a trial balloon that kind of burst the second it was launched.
So why the intense backlash? What are the terms that are causing so much trouble?
Well, the proposed terms are just deeply, deeply unpalatable to Kyiv and its strongest European allies. Two specific terms really stand out. First, the plan includes Ukraine potentially withdrawing its application to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO.
Okay, that's a huge one right there.
Yeah.
For a nation fighting for its security, that's almost a non-starter.
It's seen as a foundational concession. And the second one is a mandated significant downsizing of its military forces.
So you're telling a country that was just invaded that it can't join a defensive alliance and it has to shrink its army.
That's how it's being read. Critiques argue that these points fundamentally compromise Ukraine's long-term security and, its autonomy. If Ukraine can't choose its own alliances or maintain a robust defense, its sovereignty is, it's permanently compromised in their view.
So these terms feel a lot closer to Russian demands than what you would call Western aspirations for a free Ukraine.
That's the heart of the criticism. And it hasn't been quiet criticism either. I mean, you look at Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, who just absolutely ripped into this plan.
What did he say?
He was quoted calling it a sensational capitulation. That's a strong word.
Capitulation is not a word you throw around lightly in diplomacy.
Not at all. And Fico's comments are really significant because he's framing this not just as a bad deal, but as a total failure of the current European Union's approach. He specifically argues that this proposal makes Russia the absolute winner compared to the negotiating position Ukraine held back in the 2022 talks.
So he's essentially saying, we've fought this hard, we've lost this much, only to end up with a worse deal that basically validates Russia's aggression.
That's the essence of it. And it reflects a deep, deep frustration among certain EU leaders who feel that the bloc's more hawkish pro-war establishment policies haven't actually secured a stronger negotiating position for Kyiv. They feel they've ended up in a weaker spot.
And this frustration, it's not just an internal European thing, is it? It blew up in North America, too. We saw U.S. senators at a security conference in Canada publicly denouncing it.
Yes, and that bipartisan anger is key. The fact that you had Republicans and Democrats, who are usually unified on Ukraine, standing together in their condemnation, that's a big deal.
So they didn't just dislike it. What was the language they used?
They reportedly called the proposal one of the gravest geopolitical mistakes of the U.S. administration under President Trump.
Wow.
Their main concern revolves around these alleged concessions on territorial losses, something Ukrainian President Zelensky has said, is completely off the table.
So the lawmakers are worried that the plan, which they say was developed with some collaboration with the Kremlin, is just too close to surrender.
Regardless of who formally wrote it, yes. That's the fear.
Which brings us right to the heart of it, the authorship debate. If U.S. lawmakers are calling it a Russian wish list, how is the administration responding to that?
It's a full-on damage control operation. The administration's response has been, let's say, very carefully crafted. President Trump himself insists the plan is not a final offer, and he's stressing its flexibility.
So the classic, it's just a starting point defense.
Exactly. The official line is that they're giving President Zelensky a choice. Either agree to this framework and get peace, or you can continue fighting. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his delegates in Geneva are firmly rejecting that Russian wish list label.
They must be.
They are repeatedly emphasizing that the framework is of U.S. authorship, even if, diplomatic channels require input from all sides.
So it's the classic diplomatic dance. You float something controversial to see how everyone reacts, but you keep the option to say, hey, it's flexible, and by the way, we wrote it, not Moscow.
Precisely. They're trying to signal a genuine attempt at a diplomatic off-ramp while minimizing the appearance of caving to pressure. But the political damage, just from the perceived concessions and all this confusion over who wrote it, that's significant. It erodes trust among your core allies.
They feel like they're being strong-armed into accepting a loss.
That's the danger.
Okay, now let's dig into the economic piece of this, because it's a huge component that makes this proposal so risky, especially for Europe. The frozen Russian assets.
This is a financial and legal minefield.
A massive headache, right?
A huge one, particularly for the European Union. The EU has been meticulously, and I mean meticulously, working on a legal framework to use the interest generated from about 140 billion euros in frozen Russian assets.
And most of that is held where?
Primarily in financial institutions in Belgium, which makes them particularly exposed here.
And Russia's position on this is pretty clear.
Oh, absolutely. They view any use of these funds, even just the interest, as outright theft. They've promised fierce legal retaliation in international courts.
And this new U.S. plan just, ignores the EU's careful legal strategy?
It completely undercuts it. So the total frozen assets globally are around $300 billion. The U.S. plan reportedly proposes allocating $100 billion of that for U.S.-led reconstruction efforts.
Okay, $100 billion. How does that create a risk for the EU and their 140 billion euros?
This is where the legal risk gets very, very specific. If the U.S. proceeds with this and then Russia successfully challenges the initial confiscation in European or international courts, which is a very real possibility, the EU member states, especially Belgium, could be held legally responsible for reimbursing those funds.
So wait, the U.S. plan could force a payout that the EU has to cover?
Potentially, yes. By forcing the issue on that $100 billion, the U.S. plan creates this massive contingent liability risk for EU members. It makes their own efforts to raise funds, like their plan for a loan backed by the assets, significantly riskier.
It's like the U.S. is writing a check that Europe's banks might have to cash.
That's a good way to put it. It jeopardizes the EU's very carefully constructed financial aid strategy. It drives a wedge, forcing EU members to weigh their commitment to this U.S.-led plan against their own financial and legal stability. It's an incredibly high-stakes legal and financial gambit.
Okay, let's execute that rapid shift now and look toward Asia, focusing on China, Japan, and Taiwan. We're seeing a very clear pattern here of simultaneous soft power outreach and then some really aggressive signaling.
That dual-track diplomacy from Beijing is very evident. On the one hand, the soft power side, you had the high-level visit of Zhao Leiji, who is China's third highest official, to New Zealand.
And that visit was all smiles and handshakes.
Completely. It was all about strengthening economic ties, focusing on investments in green transformation, extending a visa-free policy, all signals of goodwill and economic partnership in the Pacific.
But immediately after that, the temperature just spiked dramatically over Taiwan and Japan.
Oh, absolutely. The velvet glove came off very swiftly. China accused Japan of sending a shocking wrong signal regarding Taiwan.
And what triggered that?
It was comments from Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi publicly stated that her remarks crossed a red line, and he framed it within this highly emotional, patriotic context of national sacrifice and sovereignty.
For our listeners, what kind of comments from a Japanese official would cross that red line? I mean, what did she likely say?
Well, the exact quotes are always sensitive, but typically a red line crossing involves any suggestion that Japan would offer direct military support to Taiwan, or any questioning of the one China principle that Beijing holds as, sacrosanct.
And by using a phrase like national sacrifice.
By invoking that, Wang Yi is reminding the world that Beijing views the Taiwan issue as an existential one, something that would justify any and all necessary response.
And that necessary response was immediately visible, wasn't it?
Immediately. The People's Liberation Army, or the PLA, escalated its military readiness right away. They initiated live fire drills, signaling a very, very serious intent. This kind of posturing serves multiple purposes.
It's a warning to Tokyo.
A direct warning to Tokyo, a psychological message to Taipei, and a reminder to the rest of the world of Beijing's capabilities and its resolve. The situation is so fragile that even minor verbal missteps can trigger kinetic responses.
And in these volatile environments, misinformation becomes a weapon itself. We saw the French Navy had to step in quickly to shut down a false story.
Yes, this was a critical case study in information warfare. Pakistani media outlets had run allegations claiming a French naval commander acknowledged Pakistan's air superiority over India during a hypothetical conflict in May 2025.
A hypothetical conflict they called Operation Sindoor.
Right, and the report wildly suggested that French-supplied Rafale jets had been downed by the Pakistani Air Force.
That's incredibly potent misinformation if your goal is to destabilize how the region sees the military balance of power.
Exactly. It can have real-world consequences. The French Navy had to step in decisively, labeling the report as extensive misinformation. It just highlights how quickly and aggressively these false narratives get deployed to shift global perception.
It underscores why verified facts are just non-negotiable when you're talking about military capabilities in a region like South Asia.
Absolutely.
All right, let's pivot to the global economy. The shifting dynamics were really powerfully illustrated at the recent Group of 20, or G20 summit in South Africa.
This was a landmark G20 summit, really, because it proceeded with significant progress despite the absence of several key global players.
Most notably the U.S. delegation, but also China and Russia.
Right. And South African President Cyril Ramaphosa made a point of highlighting that the G20 leaders still adopted a substantial 122-point declaration. And it wasn't fluff. It addressed critical issues like climate change targets and financial reform.
The fact that they could pass such a comprehensive declaration without the world's largest economy and two other global heavyweights in the room, that suggests the institutional power dynamics are really changing.
It absolutely does. It signaled that multilateralism is finding new ways forward with or without Washington or Beijing's direct involvement in certain processes. It gives a lot more weight to the voices of the global South within these structures.
And Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, he articulated this shift perfectly. He said the global economic center of gravity is moving away from the U.S.
Carney's comments weren't just an observation. They really underpinned Canada's current geopolitical strategy.
So they're acting on this belief.
Yes, Canada is actively diversifying its partnerships, trying to reduce its economic reliance on the traditional North American alliances. He specifically cited this enormous $70 billion investment commitment from the United Arab Emirates as proof of this new economic dynamism.
So the strategic implication is that if the U.S. chooses a path of, let's say, diplomatic isolation or instability, countries like Canada, who have historically relied on that American stability, are going to proactively seek deep, long-term investments from powerful non-Western partners.
To secure their own economic future, yes. It's economic pragmatism overriding traditional alliances. It shows a profound reassessment of who holds the purse strings and, where future growth is really going to come from.
Okay, moving from the very serious machinations of global politics to something truly immense. We have a major scientific revelation about our place in the universe. It turns out our solar system is traveling through space 3 times faster than standard models predict.
I know.
This is a huge error margin.
This finding is genuinely foundational. It shakes the stability of high-energy astronomy. Researchers using these huge radio telescope arrays detected a really striking dipole pattern in the cosmos.
Okay, so to understand why this is such a big deal, we need to talk about the cosmic microwave background, the CMB. That's essentially the echo of the Big Bang, right? It's supposed to be the universal reference frame.
Exactly, the cosmic rest frame. The standard cosmological model, which is called lambda CDM, it posits a certain velocity for our solar system relative to the CMB. That speed is typically around 370 kilometers per second.
Which is already incredibly fast.
It is. But this new measurement, which comes from the dipole pattern they observed in radial emissions, a pattern that indicates direction and speed, it suggests our velocity is much, much higher, perhaps 3 times that rate.
Why is this a crisis for the existing theories? I mean, so we're faster, what does that break?
It breaks a lot, because the predicted velocity is derived from our expectations about how cosmic matter is distributed and the influence of dark energy on that matter. If we are moving 3 times faster than we thought, it suggests there's an unexpectedly large gravitational influence out there, a push or a pull that our current models just cannot account for.
So either there are massive invisible structures pulling us, or our entire understanding of how we measure the universe's expansion is wrong.
That's it. It forces a complete reevaluation of our cosmic address. It's truly mind-bending.
That is. Okay, from revising our own speed, let's look 18 light years away at a new and very promising target, a super-Earth called GJ251c.
GJ251c is now a prime candidate in the search for extraterrestrial life. It's a super-Earth, which means it's bigger than Earth but smaller than Neptune, and crucially, it orbits within the habitable zone of its star.
The Goldilocks zone.
The Goldilocks zone where liquid water could exist, and its star is an M-dwarf.
And M-dwarf stars, they're smaller, cooler, and they live a lot longer than our sun, right?
Yes, they're very abundant, and they offer a long-term, stable environment, which is great for the potential evolution of life despite some issues with flares.
And being 18 light years away is, in cosmic terms, basically our next-door neighbor.
It's just down the street. It makes it an immediate target for next-generation observatories. Scientists are eagerly anticipating using future megatelescopes to perform spectroscopy on its atmosphere.
Looking for what exactly? What are the signs of life?
They'll be looking for biosignatures, things like oxygen, methane, or even better, combinations of gases that suggest metabolic processes. All of it is in the service of finding that definitive proof of liquid water.
Okay, staying in our galactic neighborhood, the XL Caliber telescope is giving us these incredible new views of black holes and pulsars, but it's doing it from the stratosphere, not from deep space.
Right. The XL Caliber mission, which was launched on a high-altitude balloon in 2024, is groundbreaking. It's not just the platform, but the measurement technique it uses. It's designed to measure polarized X-rays from extreme objects.
And the targets are Cygnus X1, a black hole, and the Crab pulsar.
That's right.
So why is polarization the key variable here? What does that tell us that a normal X-ray image doesn't?
Polarized light tells us about the magnetic fields and the geometry of the matter near the source. When matter spirals into a black hole like Cygnus X1, it generates this intensely hot, chaotic plasma. By measuring the polarization, the angle, and the degree of the X-rays coming off that plasma, scientists get crucial insights into how matter behaves in these extreme gravitational fields right at the event horizon.
So it's a way to directly test Einstein's general relativity.
It's one of our best tools for it. We're essentially using X-ray light as a probe to map the structure of warped spacetime and extreme density.
And the Crab pulsar.
Measuring the Crab pulsar, which is a rapidly spinning neutron star, helps us differentiate between various high-energy emission mechanisms. It improves our overall understanding of how stars die and what these extreme states of matter look like.
And speaking of extreme, we have to briefly touch on the theoretical physics concept that truly bends the mind. The idea that there might be extra dimensions.
This concept comes out of some really advanced theoretical frameworks, most famously string theory. String theory suggests that the fundamental bits of the universe aren't point-like particles, but these tiny, vibrating strings.
And the math just doesn't work in our normal 3 spatial dimensions plus time.
The math required for string theory to work consistently demands the existence of more than the 4 dimensions we perceive.
So why are they necessary and why can't we see them?
Well, mathematically, they're needed to reconcile the 2 great and conflicting pillars of modern physics: quantum mechanics, which governs the very small, and general relativity, which governs gravity and the very large.
And we don't see them because they're curled up.
They're thought to be compactified or curled up at scales far, far smaller than anything we can currently detect. If they do exist, They could potentially explain some huge mysteries, like why gravity is so incredibly weak compared to the other fundamental forces.
The theory is that gravity is leaking into these other dimensions.
That's one of the leading ideas, that gravity's influence is spread out across all dimensions, which is why it seems so weak in our four-dimensional existence. The idea that we are living on a brain in a higher dimensional space, it's truly humbling.
It really is. Okay, let's bring it much closer to home and look at space weather, specifically the historic solar superstorm Gannon.
The event in May of 2024 was officially the most intense solar storm to hit Earth in 2 decades. The key takeaway is just how severe its impact was on our planetary defenses.
It was a blast of charged particles that compressed Earth's protective plasmasphere.
Right.
Can you define the plasmasphere for us and explain why its compression is so concerning?
Of course. The plasmasphere is this donut-shaped inner region of our magnetosphere. It's composed of cold, dense plasma that rotates with the Earth, and it acts as a critical shield. It filters and deflects solar and cosmic radiation.
During Superstorm Gannon, the solar wind compressed this shield. By how much?
For an astonishing 20% of its normal size.
20%. That's terrifyingly small.
Yeah.
What does that actually mean for our infrastructure up there?
It drastically increases the risk to all of our satellites, both in low Earth orbit and the geostationary ones further out. The smaller plasmasphere leads to increased atmospheric drag, which can threaten satellite orbits, and it allows more harmful particles to get closer to Earth.
Which increases the risk of what are called single-event upsets.
Exactly. Electronic failures in sensitive components that can cripple GPS, telecommunications, high-precision monitoring systems, basically the backbone of our modern world. Observations from the erased satellite show that the recovery time was really prolonged, taking several days to stabilize. It was a stark reminder of our profound vulnerability.
Okay, pivoting sharply back to Earth's environment, we have some exciting new frontiers in green science. Let's start with a chemical breakthrough that's essential for both climate mitigation and food security: green ammonia production.
Ammonia is absolutely essential for fertilizer. It supports roughly half the global population. But the traditional method, the Haber-Bosch process, is incredibly energy intensive.
It uses something like 1 to 2% of all global energy.
That's right, and it produces massive CO2 emissions. This new breakthrough centers on using copper oxide catalysts.
We called it the hidden copper switch. What is the chemistry behind that moment? What is the switch?
So researchers found that during the synthesis process, the copper oxide catalyst doesn't just sit there passively, it momentarily converts to metallic copper, or C0. This transient, highly reactive metallic state is what significantly boosts the ammonia yield.
Because it makes the nitrogen fixation reaction more efficient at lower energy levels.
Much more efficient. And understanding this is key because it allows researchers to design reactors that deliberately cycle the copper through this high-efficiency state. You can effectively replace the power-hungry Haber-Bosch process with an electrochemical, climate-friendly alternative.
That is phenomenal. Sustainable fertilizer is a massive global need. Speaking of sustainability, we're now turning concrete, one of the oldest building materials, into a battery.
Energy storing concrete. This is a radical reimagining of our urban infrastructure. The innovation involves engineering concrete with specialized, highly conductive materials.
Things like carbon black.
Carbon black or specialized polymer additives, yes. This allows the structures themselves, buildings, roads, foundations, to function as low-power but very high-volume energy storage units.
So a skyscraper could potentially store the clean energy that's generated by solar panels on its roof and then use it at night.
Exactly. Now, the energy density isn't comparable to, say, a lithium-ion car battery, but the sheer volume available in our cities is just staggering. This helps address rising energy demands and offers a decentralized, sustainable way to manage peak loads and integrate intermittent renewable energy sources like wind and solar.
It's putting our most traditional building materials right at the forefront of the clean energy revolution.
It really is.
Finally, in this section, let's discuss one of the most remarkable biological feats: the complex, hidden navigation sense of baby loggerhead turtles.
This research revealed a previously unrecognized layer of complexity in how these animals navigate thousands of miles across the open ocean. We already knew they use the Earth's magnetic field, but this new study found they also use a touch-based magnetic sense.
Touch-based? That sounds completely counterintuitive for an oceanic journey. How does that work?
It is strange. Researchers trained the turtles to associate specific magnetic field characteristics with food rewards. When the turtles sensed the food magnetic field, they would perform this distinctive dance.
Okay.
But here's the critical part. When a brief magnetic pulse was applied, which temporarily scrambles their magnetic sense, the turtles stopped the dance. This suggests that the magnetic field information is processed through sensory receptors that are linked to touch or pressure.
So they feel the magnetic field.
In a manner of speaking, yes. It highlights an incredibly complex biological adaptation that allows them to maintain precise orientation over vast distances, even when there are no visual cues.
Okay, let's move into technology. The pace of AI development is now so rapid that the energy required to fuel it is forcing companies to fundamentally restructure their entire business. A perfect example. Meta, the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, is now getting into the wholesale electricity trading market.
This is a direct corporate response to an existential demand. Meta's massive resource-intensive data centers, which are constantly expanding to power their AI models, require huge, reliable, and sustainable sources of energy.
And the old ways of buying power aren't working anymore.
Traditional power purchase agreements, or PPAs, are no longer sufficient to secure the kind of long-term power they need at the scale they need it.
So becoming a direct electricity trader is a necessity, not just some sideline venture to make a bit of extra money.
It's strategic vertical integration. By getting directly involved in the wholesale market, Meta can secure long-term, low-cost power deals. But crucially, it also allows them to leverage opportunities to sell excess energy back to the grid during peak demand.
So it promotes their own efficiency and also helps stabilize the grid.
Right. They're essentially becoming a utility player to ensure their own growth isn't choked by energy limitations.
This expansion into new territory leads us directly into the regulatory tightrope walk. Waymo, which is Alphabet's autonomous vehicle company, just got a massive regulatory win in California.
A huge win. Waymo received the green light from the California Public Utilities Commission to significantly expand its fully autonomous robotaxi services across Southern California and the Bay Area.
And this is built on a pretty solid track record.
A very robust track record. They're already logging over 250,000 paid rides per week in their existing operational zones. This is a monumental expansion.
But the regulatory challenge remains the same, doesn't it? It's always this balance between supporting innovation and ensuring public safety.
Absolutely. While this approval signals immense confidence in their technology, the regulatory environment for autonomous vehicles is still intensely scrutinized. Every single incident is amplified. Cities have to constantly balance the promise of these innovative, efficient transportation solutions against very valid public concerns about safety, ethical decision-making in the algorithms, and, who's liable when something goes wrong.
Shifting to AI policy in Washington, we're seeing a significant regulatory pause from the U.S. administration. They're reportedly holding off on challenging state-level AI regulations.
This represents a major shift in their thinking. Initially, the administration, under its America's AI Action Plan, was heavily emphasizing deregulation. The belief was that less regulation would spur faster innovation and help the U.S. maintain its global tech leadership.
So what caused the reassessment? Why the change of heart?
It seems to have been heavily influenced by public sentiment and polling.
The public is actually worried about this stuff.
Very worried. Polling showed a strong, widespread public support for federal regulation and oversight of AI technology. People are genuinely concerned about job displacement, algorithm bias, the rapid rise of sophisticated deepfakes, you name it.
So this public pressure forced the administration to hit pause on its deregulation-first approach.
Exactly. They recognized the political and ethical necessity of balancing that rapid innovation with ensuring public trust and accountability. And that means, for now, they have to allow this patchwork of state regulations to persist.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the world in China, the speed of consumer adoption in AI is just astounding. We're seeing this rapid ascent of something called vibe coding.
Vibe coding is the new phenomenon, and it's epitomized by Ant Group's app, Lingguang. It hit an astonishing 1 million downloads in just 4 days.
4 days. That rate outpaced competitors like OpenAI's ChatGPT or Sora in terms of immediate consumer uptake.
By a lot.
So what exactly is vibe coding? What does it let users do that's so different from a standard large language model?
It's the democratization of development. It allows users to generate custom applications simply from text prompts describing a vibe or a need. So you're moving beyond just generating text or an image, you're generating functional code and interfaces.
So it acts as a personal AI developer for the masses.
That's a perfect way to put it. It symbolizes this intense trend in the Chinese tech market toward making AI tools accessible to amateur programmers, driving this explosive consumer engagement in AI creation, not just consumption.
That speed of adoption really underscores how quickly entire market segments can shift. Let's look at some other market trends in affordability, starting with the UK economy and transportation costs.
The UK government announced a really landmark policy decision. Regulated rail fares in England, including season tickets and off-peak returns, will be frozen for the next year.
Which is the first time that's happened in how long?
30 years. It's a direct, targeted measure aimed at providing significant cost of living relief for millions of commuters who are really struggling with high inflation.
But at the same time, the push for green transport seems to be caught in this kind of fiscal contradiction. EV policy is getting a massive boost, and also the threat of new taxes.
That's the difficult balancing act, isn't it? The government is expected to announce a substantial £1.3 billion boost for the electric vehicle, or EV, grant scheme. They want to incentivize adoption to meet their environmental targets.
However,
Simultaneously, there's strong anticipation that new taxes on EV owners will be introduced.
and these new taxes are meant to replace what? The lost revenue from fuel duty?
Exactly. EVs don't pay fuel duty, which is a major revenue stream for the government. These new taxes, they could be road usage charges or tariffs based on vehicle weight or efficiency. They're designed to offset that lost revenue and ensure fiscal responsibility. It illustrates this global challenge of how you fund infrastructure when you're moving away from traditional combustion engine taxes.
And speaking of shifting consumer preferences, the iconic American motorcycle industry seems to be struggling.
We're seeing a really concerning trend with Harley-Davidson dealerships across the U.S. They're shutting down at an alarming rate.
And what's driving that?
The economic distress is rooted in a few things. Low consumer demand, surging operational costs, and really stiff competition both from international brands and the growing electric motorcycle market.
It really feels like a symbol of a shift away from that classic American heavyweight market.
It does. It reflects changing consumer demographics. The traditional Harley buyer is aging, and younger buyers are often looking for different styles, lower costs, or they want electric alternatives right now. The closures just highlight the pressure on these heritage brands that struggle to adapt to rapid generational and technological shifts.
But if you are choosing to dine out, there's a strong trend toward tech-driven affordability. And this was illustrated by a great, very public anecdote.
This went viral because it was so relatable, even though it involved high finance. Vijay Shekhar Sharma, who is the founder of Payteam, he shared how he reduced a nearly 41,000 rupee restaurant bill.
Which is a huge sum.
A huge sum, down to about 24,700 rupees using a digital platform called Easy Diner.
That's a massive saving. What does this little story tell us about the broader market?
It illustrates the growing consumer reliance on these digital discount tools in the dining industry, even for high-end experiences. It shows that these platforms and apps are now playing this intermediary role, essentially mediating affordability between consumers and restaurants.
And I imagine they're squeezing already tight restaurant margins in the process.
They often are, yes. But they're also ensuring continued consumer spending in a high-cost environment. It's a complex relationship.
We turn now to ongoing conflicts, starting in the Middle East, where the ceasefire in Gaza remains incredibly fragile. It's being tested daily.
The October ceasefire, which provided a desperately needed pause, has been severely strained. We've seen fresh Israeli airstrikes, which resulted in at least 24 fatalities and 54 injuries, and that puts immense pressure on the truce.
And the situation is just clouded by claims and counterclaims, isn't it?
It's intensely volatile. There's a narrative battle over who is actually breaking the truce.
What's the latest on that front?
Hamas is firmly denying recent reports that claim they were unilaterally ending the truce. Their official position is that Israel is fabricating these claims and that it's Israel itself that is systematically violating the agreement.
And amidst all this tension and media warfare, where are the diplomatic efforts happening?
Hamas leaders are engaged in critical meetings with Egyptian intelligence in Cairo. They're trying to secure the continuation of humanitarian aid and, potentially negotiate a more durable arrangement.
And further north, the Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire, which has been in place for a year, is also under constant, persistent violation.
The lack of a comprehensive diplomatic solution means this is really a ceasefire in name only. It's been marred by persistent cross-border exchanges. That includes recent Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon that caused civilian casualties and damaged public infrastructure.
And the fear is that this could escalate back into a full-scale conflict.
That's the genuine fear. Local officials and international analysts are warning that this ongoing tit-for-tat violence, without some serious diplomatic intervention, could easily spiral, potentially drawing in other regional players.
Let's shift to the high-stakes domestic drama in the United States. We have to address the intensity of President Trump's rhetoric regarding military orders and dissent.
The president has dramatically intensified his criticism of Democratic lawmakers who had previously urged U.S. troops to refuse any illegal orders. He publicly labeled these lawmakers as traitors.
And he went further than that.
He went so far as to suggest they should face imprisonment or, in the most extreme framing, the death penalty.
That specific language labeling political opposition as traitors who deserve the death penalty, that is extraordinarily volatile in a constitutional republic. What are the legal and ethical implications here for the military chain of command?
It raises profound legal questions, and they're tied to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the UCMJ. The UCMJ mandates that service members must follow lawful orders, but they have a legal and an ethical duty to refuse unlawful orders.
So by framing the discussion about refusing potentially illegal orders as treason, what is the president doing?
He's essentially politicizing the foundational principle of military ethics. It creates immense pressure on military discipline, it blurs the line between civil dissent and sedition, and it absolutely escalates the potential for political violence in the country. We have to report that, quote, factually, but the implications for the rule of law are immense.
We also saw this ongoing tension between the Department of Justice, or the DOJ, and the judiciary get revisited in the case involving the former FBI director, James Comey.
Right. The DOJ publicly criticized the judge who's overseeing the Comey case after some procedural errors were made by the prosecutors during the indictment process.
And these kinds of procedural details matter hugely in a high-profile legal case.
They're everything. Comey's defense team is now aggressively pushing for dismissal. They're arguing that these procedural missteps, which relate to mishandled grand jury instructions or how evidence was presented, violate due process.
So the procedural flaws are creating this tension between two branches of government and potentially handing the defense a path to have the case thrown out.
Exactly. It highlights the fierce pressure that gets applied to federal prosecutors in these politically charged cases, and the intense, often very public scrutiny of the judicial process.
And the DOJ is still pursuing public transparency in the Jeffrey Epstein case, correct?
They are. They're making repeated efforts to unseal grand jury materials related to Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in Florida. This is a very complex legal battle.
Because it pits the public's right to know against the secrecy of the grand jury.
Precisely. It pits the public interest in accountability and transparency against the fundamental legal protections of grand jury secrecy and the privacy rights of those involved. But the DOJ's sustained, repeated push really underscores its ongoing societal demand for a full accounting in a case that touches so many high-profile figures globally.
Globally, we have to note some truly devastating incidents, starting with the humanitarian crisis in Nigeria.
The crisis in northern Nigeria continues to escalate dramatically. We saw a catastrophic failure of government security measures with over 315 children and teachers kidnapped. This was the second school abduction in just 1 week.
And this reflects the deep entrenchment of violence there.
It does. It's often fueled by criminal bandit groups and extremist organizations like Boko Haram, who use kidnapping for ransom as their primary economic tool. This systemic failure is causing immense humanitarian distress, and it's destabilizing the entire region.
On a truly bizarre and disturbing note, we have this intersection of crime and geopolitical ambition in the Caribbean.
This is a story that defies easy categorization. 2 U.S. men were indicted in Texas for plotting to seize the Haitian island of Ile de la Gonâve.
And the allegations are just shocking. They detail intentions of murder, specifically of the male population, and the enslavement of women and children.
The motives alleged are horrifying. Prosecutors described them as rape fantasies, and one of the men reportedly even enlisted in the U.S. Air Force to acquire military training for this scheme.
It's this unusual and extreme intersection of criminal enterprise, ideological extremism, and this bizarre geopolitical objective of establishing a private criminal state.
It really underscores how global instability can sometimes attract the most dangerous and bizarre fringe elements.
Meanwhile, in Europe, a major French city is fighting back against organized crime.
That was in Marseille, France. Thousands gathered in a massive rally to condemn the rising drug-related violence that has plagued the city.
And this was spurred by a specific tragedy.
It was. The demonstration was tragically spurred by the killing of an activist's brother. The thousands who were present were delivering a powerful call for increased government intervention. They're demanding proactive measures against organized crime, better social investment, and a dedicated response to the root causes of the drug trade.
And finally, we must mention the tragic story of Aishat by Mordova, which underscores the dangers faced by those fleeing authoritarian regimes.
Aishat Bamardova was a young Chechen woman who had fled her homeland. She was seeking freedom from the systemic persecution against LGBTQ+ individuals there.
And tragically, she was found dead.
She was found dead in her rented flat in Russia. Her death, while it's still under investigation, highlights the extreme vulnerability of those who escaped violence, only to find that authoritarian reach and systemic dangers often follow them. It underscores the critical need for robust international human rights protections.
All right, let's end with some cultural notes and some high-stakes sports drama. First, the art world continues to defy any kind of economic pessimism, setting new auction records.
It was a huge week for art market valuations. Masterpieces by two colossal figures, Frida Kahlo and Gustav Klimt, both shattered their previous records at auction.
And this demonstrates that even in these times of geopolitical and economic uncertainty, high-value iconic art just continues to command extraordinary prices.
It reflects their enduring cultural impact and, frankly, their status as investment assets.
Moving to popular culture, we have Rupert Grint, who will forever be Ron Weasley from the Harry Potter films, reflecting on the weight of that iconic role.
He shared his very honest sentiment that he believes he will never step out of Ron Weasley's shadow. He's clearly come to terms with the legacy. He even wrote a thoughtful letter to the next actor who will play the role in the upcoming home box office or HBO adaptation,
acknowledging the unique pressures and the immense joy of inheriting such a beloved character.
Exactly.
And the way we drink our morning coffee seems to be changing, driven by the wellness movement. These functional coffees are rapidly moving mainstream.
This is the wellness trend hitting the high street. Functional coffees, the ones infused with ingredients like medicinal mushrooms for cognitive benefits, or adaptogens like ashwagandha for stress reduction, they are transitioning very rapidly from niche health food stores into mainstream coffee shops.
It just reflects a growing consumer desire for beverages that offer specific, targeted wellness benefits beyond just a caffeine hit.
That's right.
Now to the high-stakes drama of Formula One. The Las Vegas Grand Prix had a stunning, championship-altering conclusion, but it didn't happen on the track.
No, it didn't. The race had a clean winner, but it was the post-race scrutineering that delivered the knockout blow. McLaren drivers Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri were both disqualified.
And this is for technical infringements related to their car specifications.
Specifically, non-compliance with the skid block wear tolerance. It's a very technical rule, but it's enforced very strictly.
So what does a double disqualification like that do to the championship season?
It's a huge championship swing. Lando Norris was already in a close fight with Red Bull's Max Verstappen, and this disqualification strips both McLaren drivers of crucial points. That loss effectively narrows the title gap for Verstappen, bolstering his chance to secure his fifth consecutive F1 title with a much wider margin.
Technical regulations are just unforgiving.
Absolutely.
And in college football, Week 13 was pivotal for the playoff picture.
A massive shakeup, particularly out west. The number 7 ranked Oregon Ducks secured a dominant victory over their rivals, the University of Southern California, or USC.
And that win not only secured Oregon's position, but it definitively eliminated USC from the playoff race.
That's right. And elsewhere, Oklahoma secured a crucial 17-6 defensive win over Missouri, which keeps their own slim but still viable playoff hopes alive as the regular season ends.
And some decisive results in the world of rugby as well.
We saw the continuing dominance of the All Blacks, with New Zealand crushing Wales 52-26 in Cardiff. That extends their remarkable 7-decade winning streak against the Welsh national team.
And France had a high-scoring win as well.
They did, a 48-33 win against the Australian Wallabies, which ensured the Australians finished their European Tour winless for the first time since 1958. That signals some real trouble for Australian rugby.
Finally, let's look at a complex convergence of political extremism and faith in the UK. This is posing a significant challenge for the Church of England.
The Church of England is facing a really unique ethical and pastoral dilemma. They're having to navigate this growing trend of far-right supporters, often inspired by figures like Tommy Robinson, who are actively embracing Christianity.
And this trend highlights a pretty troubling fusion of extremist nationalism and religious identity.
It does.
So how does the church handle this? How do they do it without taking political sides but still standing firm on their core values?
It forces them to strike an incredibly careful balance. They have to maintain a doctrine of welcome for all congregants, but they must simultaneously stand firm against ideologies of division, hatred, and white nationalism.
So they're trying to clarify that Christian theology fundamentally contradicts these exclusionary and xenophobic platforms.
Yes, and it underscores the difficulty of preventing a religious identity from being co-opted for political ends.
And a final quick note on celebrity security, just underscoring the risk that high-profile events still carry.
Actress and singer Ariana Grande was involved in a distressing incident at a premiere where a man physically grabbed her. The prompt response by security led to that individual being banned from entering Singapore. It just highlights the ongoing serious security concerns for high-profile figures at public events and the need for zero tolerance for these kinds of breaches.
You know, if you just step back and reflect on the sheer breadth of what we've discussed, from discovering our solar system is moving 3 times faster than we thought, which demands we revise our whole cosmic understanding,
Right.
to the breakthrough of using these tiny nasal-delivered nanodrops to fight aggressive brain cancer, the rate at which knowledge is evolving is just staggering.
It is a profound summary of our world, isn't it? We've moved from the ancient mysteries of an undecipherable script found in Georgia that resists all attempts at interpretation,
Right.
to the immediate volatile diplomacy around the Ukraine peace plan, where we struggle just as hard to verify the authorship of a modern critical document.
And that is the crux of our final provocative thought for you, the learner. We are struggling to read an ancient script that is over 1,000 years old, yet in our current global diplomacy, we struggle just as hard to verify the modern immediate authorship of a document that could end a war. The U.S. peace plan is publicly called a Russian wish list by U.S. senators and by allies, while the U.S. administration insists it authored the plan.
And given the intense reality of information warfare, the contested narratives around things like climate science, and the extreme complexity of these geopolitical frameworks, this raises a crucial question for how you consume information. How should any of us accurately discern between a genuine good faith framework intended for peace and a dangerous fabrication, a Trojan horse designed to compromise a nation's sovereignty?
And what are the profound implications for global trust and for the stability of our alliances when the very origin of a document intended to end a war is openly and vehemently questioned by the most invested allies?
It's an essential question to carry forward.
We appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the vital stories shaping our world. Until next time, stay curious.
And keep questioning the sources and the authors.
You're enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.